This is the third presentation given at the 2024 National Gun Conference. And this is by former Senator Nigel Scullion on the topic gun laws, especially WA. Now, Nigel was a professional fisherman before being elected to the Senate in 2001, representing the country Liberal Party in the NT. He was deputy leader of the National Party from 2007 to 2013. He held ministerial office under 4 prime ministers and was the only minister to hold the same portfolio in 3 governments. And he retired at the 2019 federal election. So, if you can bear with me, I've just got to...
Thank you very much, Neil. I really appreciate the invitation. Can I also acknowledge great thanks to David Linehelm and David. How's that?
Yeah, better. There you go.
Crackerjack. So I think there were fantastic contributions. So since I left Parliament, without going too much into it, I thought I wasted an awful lot of my life not fishing and shooting full time, and I've changed that to adopt my new life. So I've actually managed to do 5 trips around Australia, probably 50-50 shooting and fishing all the time, and it was great to be under this illusion that the National Firearms Agreement had allowed me to move from jurisdiction to jurisdiction seamlessly and all those sort of things. Unfortunately, that isn't a reality. And as David Brown indicates, now in Western Australia, if you have a firearms licence in the Northern Territory or anywhere else, it is worthless in Western Australia. So look, what I thought I might do, obviously, well, not obviously, but there's many of the issues that were mentioned by the previous 2 contributors. So what I'll do, I'll talk a bit about the actual impact of the West Australian Firearms Act, just go through the nuts so people can understand the significant, and I think the term draconian, significant, all these sort of terms have actually been used by the Minister, and that is significant, and the Commissioner, because they're very proud that this is legislation that goes beyond the pale. So following some fatal shootings, I think in 2018 and 2024 respectively, I think 6 and 2 lots of victims of these both mental health tragedies, and there was an expectation that the government would be able to do something about that, and there were some circumstances that were like almost the perfect storm. There were certainly more snakes and ladders in Western Australia during that time. So about March in 2022, they announced that they're going to have reforms. So I think it was the 27th of June this year, it actually passed and was assented to become legislation. But it is fairly different in that most of the regulation hasn't actually been written. So the detail. So again, it's a peculiar circumstance that I'll get to. So they decided that they would initiate the legislation with a staggered introduction, of which we're not actually sure which parts are going to be introduced on that, and sometimes that does happen. They've introduced a buyback in these circumstances that concludes at the end of this month. So after this month, you won't be able to use a buyback that, by the way, says a double-barrel shotgun that's less than 6 weeks old, 6 years old, is worth $750, and I think if it's more than 6 years old, it's $420. So you get a bit of a sense of that. It's $63 million, 31st of August, or the full use of the fund, whichever comes first, that's it. So they've introduced a numerical limit. So in Western Australia, there's a maximum number of firearms you can hold. If you're a hunter, it's 5. In competition, across different competitions, there's a maximum of 10. If you're hunting and in competition, it's still a maximum of 10. So some of the most important things is actually how it's impacted on non-hunters and shooters, which are property owners. Yes, they may have an interest in that, So if you're going to give a written authority, and there's two in Western Australia, the first is that this enables you to gain a firearms licence. The second is what they call a temporary authority. Yes, you can come shooting here for a couple of days. Both of them now, to be written, the police will have to attend your property and inspect it, and they will decide if that property is suitable, and any restrictions with things like calibre, etc., can be placed on that property. It's a pretty significant change. All club letters are now non-valid, and all club letters that enable you to have a firearm in Western Australia have to be reapplied for. Interestingly, there's now a mandatory health check. So it was going to be that 90,000 licence holders had to go to a psychiatrist. Of course, they decided to move away from that. Whether it was ambered or not, I don't know. Now you're going to have to go to your doctor immediately to maintain your licence. And every 5 years, if you're over 80 years of old, you have to go every year. No one's really sure what the medical practitioner is going to provide, except it's not going to be medical information to the police, but whatever they provide to the police will make a decision on that. Mandatory training, the same as introduced, the same as many places in Australia. The collector's licence, the provision in the collector's licence is that, for example, in World War II pistols, it must have a significant historical value related to World War II. So it's the police that make the decision if that's a significant historical value. And so all of these are part of many of the changes. There's some heirloom firearms. They're no longer allowed to be collectible. If you've got heirloom firearms, they'll have to be permanently incapacitated or licensed under the new scheme. Storage requirements, they quote the storage requirements as new stringent requirements, although regulations haven't actually laid out what those requirements are going to have. But depending on licence type, storage location, the firearm category and the number of firearms, apparently some of the existing approved cabinets may still be valid, but they're going to let us know once the regulations are drafted. Primary producers, to be a primary producer, you need a letter from the ATO. You need also, though, not only a letter from the ATO saying you're a primary producer, you need to provide the police with your business accounts. You're going to be allowed maximum of 10 firearms. Family members and employees are going to be authorised persons. Again, a decision from the police. I think there's the fact that many of these issues are no longer consistent with legislative frameworks in other jurisdictions is obviously I think, of great concern that there isn't any consistency, because someone like myself who travels, if you want to travel to shoot in a competition or hunt as I do, it is certainly the complete. You can no longer pretend that we have a national firearms framework. So the narrative, as I've indicated, from the West Australian government were the two mental health issues, and their narrative was the Osmington shooting and the Floriat shooting in 2024. We need a significant reform of the Firearms Act, and any of the rationales around this are around public safety. It's about public safety. When we finish this, the public's going to be a lot safer, and the inference is that these mental health issues will not occur because of these sweeping issues. Again, officer safety, police officer safety in terms of occupational health and safety has been mentioned throughout this by the Commissioner. So I might just touch on the perfect storm that has existed in Western Australia. First of all, we had a government with no political restraint required. They had 90% of the seats in Parliament, 90%. So normally people would calibrate what we're going to do against its popularity, against, well, will we maybe win a seat or not a seat with this? But the whole process in Western Australia seems to be characterised by a government who know that this is in the margins and we're just going to be doing absolutely anything that we want. So the actual vote of the bill went through with 95% support. The three Liberals, which was 5%, supported Labor, 90%, 95% support. The commentary in the media was supportive generally of the change. There's a highly respected commissioner at the time, Cole Blanche, who's a huge advocate of these changes, principally because of the occupational health and safety issues for his officers, and the relationship between the minister, who was a big supporter of the commissioner, and so all of these issues landing in the same place, really a perfect storm in West Australia. Now, despite significant resources and lobbying from West Australian Firearms Community Alliance, a lot of resources from others, from SSAA, assistance from CIFA, the Shooters Union, and don't be offended, I've missed you out, but lots of people around Australia assisted them. Despite that, I think a reasonable person would say they really failed to achieve any real impact on what the government wanted to do. So that's all pretty miserable, but what I sort of is, what can we do now? What should we be doing to ensure that what happened in West Australia can't just happen to us? Now, look, we can't control whether the government has 95%, although I think we can certainly have an impact. I believe we need a single, united, well-funded, representative body, not a new one. The great irony is I really like the model in West Australia of an alliance of existing groups. And that body really needs to develop and deliver a political strategy and an educational strategy and engagement strategy. So we've had some success, I know people will know, so politicians have engaged with poly shoots around Australia, they've been very successful. We've had similar media events and we've had some educational events. But there are plenty of places where it doesn't happen. There's plenty of politicians who haven't been engaged to the extent that they should. There's plenty of organisations, and as David Brown mentions, the engagement with new partners like unions. I mean, I'll take this opportunity to thank the unions that were responsible for the change, because it was lost. The government had decided, again, a very powerful government, they had decided we are going to have an inquiry, and on the back of that inquiry will tell us that we can move ahead. Now, the inquiry, in fact, told them quite the opposite. Duck shooting in Victoria was sustainable. The word was, well, they're just going to do it anyway. The union turned up and said, oh, no, you're not. And I think what we need to do is understand we need to be innovative about our engagement with new partners. We have new threats, and I think part of the challenge that we have is identifying some of these new threats like the transport of firearms, insurance for actual firearms, hunting, woke generally. There's a lot of organisations, including Australia Post, who have had a go at, look, I don't really want to carry, we don't need to move firearms, it's all too hard. I think that organisation should be providing assistance with Minister of Appeal tribunals, particularly in terms of a precedent or a test case, and in West would be particularly important. I think for the first time providing independent technical advice around some, instead of just saying, oh, we'll just ask the police. So the police in Western Australia, we didn't need the anti-gun lobby or No Guns Australia. We had a police commissioner, and I think that the risk is, in Australia, self-evident that we now have a precedent about how to go about it. So we spoke briefly about the Adler ban. I'd like to leave off on something that we did right. It was really a great example of a well-coordinated strategy. They talked about the new technology, rapid fire, threat to public safety, the same stuff. And whilst I can't speak about details of what happened in Cabinet, I was a Cabinet Minister at the time, what I can speak about is I think the thing that made the greatest difference, and thanks very much, David Lionhelm, for your work in this area, but we worked across Parliament, is that when people understood technically that this was not new technology, that this would not provide any further lethality, and were able to, in an evidence-based way, it was very difficult for them to continue the proposed ban, in fact, the temporary ban that was already placed on the Adler. So yes, we can get it, but we do need to provide to the right people the right information at the right time. And I think a national organisation of the existing organisations, or an arrangement between those organisations, would be able to achieve similar outcomes in the future. So thanks very much, everyone.
Okay, thank you for that, Nigel. And the panelists would like to comment or ask a question, feel free.
I'll have a quick a word there. You're quite correct on national associations and people working together. We have found, working with CIFA, working with dealers, and just the experience we've had, particularly here in Queensland, but also at the federal level, you can't get one association to represent everyone's interests. So that's why we have all these other interest groups. But certainly, you're quite correct. You know, the major groups, the clay target associations, the SSAAs, ourselves, that cross all of the boundaries. As we go forward from here, and things are getting, more competitive in the regulatory sense, in other words, it's us versus them, we're going to need to do that a lot more. And I'm delighted, actually, one of our panelists today is another one of the big association representatives, because it's very topical. In fact, he and I have discussed this as to going forward into the future. We're all going to need to pull together. And one of our guys in New South Wales has even been looking at how to interact with trade union movements that are supportive of our cause, because a lot of our members are builders, electricians, mining, what have you. They understand how the union movement works. We're certainly starting to talk to some people up here about how to learn from their experiences. So thank you, Nigel. I think you've probably ticked a few things in the wish list for certainly us and other groups moving forward into the next sort of 5 to 10 years.
Okay. Interesting you use the word competitive, that we're competitive with regulatory agencies. I'm sure it's not adversarial.
Was probably being polite. It's
Okay.
It's adversarial for sure.
Okay, look, thank you for that. And unless anybody else has any questions or anything else to say?
I'd just like to, if I can, Neil, there's one thing that has irked me for many, many years, and it's a part of the environment under which we operate. We think for a moment it is quite surprising that it is allowed to be a part of this process. And that's the role that police play in firearm reform. They have an acknowledged and stated position that is anti-firearm. That we want less shooters, we want less firearms. And yet they are in the very centre. Every committee, every decision, all the discretion is down to the police. And yet it has remained, until today, unchallenged. Now, I think it's something that we should consider making part of our narrative about simply challenging it. Why would we have cars that if you don't register your car or you run into someone or you do something dreadful with a vehicle, the police attend to it because it's part of the criminal code? In exactly the same way as firearms do. But every firearm, the vehicle registry is run by the Department of Transport. It's just a cool bananas thing. They get the rules, you go out and you do what you need to do with your vehicle. But in firearms, it's the police that are always involved. It's irrational. It really doesn't have a precedent. And yet they have an apprehended position that is a complete bias. They have put that forward themselves. And it's something that I think, in terms of advancing our cause, would need a sophisticated and proper approach, because I believe that if the actual firearms registration and this whole process were managed in the same way we do with other tools that we use, and the police are there for when you actually break the law, we would all be a lot better off.
Yeah, I think you've got half a dozen people here who are absolutely on the same page.